Mhm. Well, it's noon, and I'm sure we're going to have more people chiming in. We've got a lot of people here today, which is great. That's what we intended. I hesitated whether or not to do this in a webinar format, but I'm really hoping that if we have just the right amount of people, we'll have a chance to do some question and answer at the tail end of this. Quite a few of you have probably been meeting with us and with our Housing Solutions team through the year. But what I really wanted to do was highlight what we've been able to do with the program over 2020 and talk a little bit about housing data that some of you have probably heard a number of times. But there are quite a few people here today too that I probably have not spoken to before. So it's an opportunity for us to present the program generally and some of the housing data that leads us to do the work we do, and talk a little bit about how we're trying to solve some of these housing issues. So we're going to get started. What I'm probably going to do right now is mute everybody. I can do that on my end, so don't worry about it if you can't find your mute button. And I'm doing that just because we have enough people in the room, and you never know what can happen, dogs barking, whatever. And I would like to get through the presentation, given how many people we have. But please jot down your questions if you have questions along the way. And I'm happy to go back to whatever slide you had a question about, talk a little bit more in depth. But also, for all of you and any of you, I'd like you to feel free to invite me to any groups or organizations that you're part of to talk a little bit more about housing. And I can take any aspect of what I'm talking about here today and go into it in more depth, especially if you're any of the elected officials that are one of the sponsoring agencies that really help us do what we're doing. But anybody, part of what my role is to get the word out on housing and let people know what they can be doing to help. It's really everybody's issue. So everybody has a role in doing this, and I can help make some of those suggestions as to how we can do it. So thank you everybody for being here. I really am encouraged by the number of people. I'm always encouraged by the intensity of the interest of that everybody has towards housing. I think we all understand how housing impacts us in our own worlds. What I try to do is help give some data and some information and some scenarios and ideas as to how it impacts other people that you're maybe not familiar with in the community. Talk a little bit about specifics and how housing impacts all the different aspects of our communities, and then share some of the information on how to solve that. So I'm going to share my screen and show a PowerPoint presentation here. Hopefully you can all see this. Everybody seeing the PowerPoint? Okay, good. Charlevoix County Housing Ready program is what we're talking about here today, but I also want to talk a little bit about Housing North, and that'll come up periodically. The relationship between the two, Housing North is a regional 10-county agency. It's a nonprofit, private nonprofit agency that spun off of Networks Northwest to really focus on creating housing solutions for our region. One of the first Housing Ready programs was Charlevoix County. And what's exciting about this is that all of the communities, the cities, Boyne City, City of East Jordan, and City of Charlevoix, as well as the County of Charlevoix, the Fry Foundation, the Charlevoix County Community Foundation, all together established a partnership. And for a couple of years before I started back in March, they had been facilitating housing solutions teams within the three main communities within Charlevoix County. And they call themselves each the area housing solutions. So Boyne Area Housing Solutions, East Jordan Area Housing Solutions. And in Charlevoix, it's the Housing and Business Park Initiative. So recognizing that economic development and housing go hand in hand. So each one has a group of stakeholders, people that are part of a decision-making process that can really impact change that related to housing in their communities. This is, like I said, this had gone on for 2 years before I started in early 2020. All of those agencies decided, let's partner together. those 5 agencies, 6 agencies pitched in and said, we're gonna make it happen so that we can have a full-time person doing housing, focused on creating housing solutions. And that's when I was hired. I started on March 16th, the day of the governor's first executive order locking down the county and the whole state. So it's been an interesting first year in a position, but it really hasn't deterred us from getting what we want done, what we need to do done. It has hampered just a little bit the face-to-face relationships that I would prefer to build in this first year, but that hasn't really slowed us down at all. Luckily, I had already met a lot of people that were involved with already in my previous life here. So I'm really looking forward to the next couple of years also. And beyond that. So really many thanks to all the communities that have pitched in, and the really dedicated people that have been part of this. I'd heard good things about it, and in my first year here, I've been absolutely thrilled to be working with such a great group of people that have been absolutely dedicated to this and making change happen. So these are the main topics that I'm going to go through. Housing data is the first one. I just want to highlight some of those housing data points that really help bring it home as to how intense this need is and what kind of essentially a housing crisis we're in right now. And it's we weren't sure what was going to happen after COVID came. Were there going to be some housing opportunities created from it? But it has really added to the challenges that we have. We're going to talk about whose issue this is, talk about a little bit about the strategy, some of the projects that we're doing, some of the broader legislative initiatives. That's when I'm going to talk a little bit more about Housing North and the regional initiatives that we're taking on to really boost housing opportunities in rural areas. And then looking to 2021, what are we going to be doing next year? So first off, many of you have probably seen this. If you haven't, we have more details on this targeted market analysis that was done in 2019. Networks Northwest and Housing North partnered on this study. It was done to find out what kind of housing needs do we have right now. And the numbers that you see on the screen right now is an annual housing market demand. So essentially every year for the next 5 years, this is how many housing units, both rental and homeowner units, that could be absorbed into our market every single year. Now, it's not cumulative if we don't match the 1 year. This is pretty much what we can absorb annually on that at that rate. The top part here, you can see that 792 rentals are needed in our communities. You can see the cost breakdown of where that demand is happening. You can see that 63% of the potential demand every year is for household incomes $26,000 and below, which means affordable rents at $650 and less. And if you know the rental market in this area, it's I have not found a rental unit that's $650 or less, except for some of the subsidized housing units. I know Northern Homes Community Development Corporation has some, and through our local housing commissions in each community, those become available. You could have 500 units absorbed, new units added to the market, and those could be absorbed by people that need that. That's substantial. You can see that 94% of the demand for rental units is for households with $40,000 income and below. For home ownership, we have a lot of need there too. And you can see how this is broken down by price. Over a third of the housing units that are needed in the community right now in all of Charlevoix County, 150 units could be absorbed at $150,000 or less. And you really, and I know because my wife and I just bought a 100-year-old house in that price range, it needed a lot of work. That was what we wanted to do. We were prepared for that. And we have the incomes to sustain it, but very few people really want to get into a home situation where you have to gut the house and rehab it. So what you have in this situation is most people looking for some sort of home that's, you're definitely not buying a new home for anything under probably $280,000 to $300,000. But most of our housing need is $250,000 or less. That's 90% of the housing need that we could absorb into the market right now is at $250,000 or less. And that's $100,000 household income or less. So what you have is basically 11% of the population that looking for homes, and that's about the only percent of our population that could absorb a new home. This kind of breaks it down. Similar, same data right here. You can see it in a donut graph, just to see the intensity of that need. 63% of that need is for rental units less than 650, and home ownership units. You can see here again, the purple and the green here. This is the major part of the need right here, and that's at $250,000 or less. And what we have here, let me go back to this rental unit real quick, just to give you an idea of what the need is here. And a housing wage, what we call a housing wage in our community, is $14.60 an hour. That means that's how much you have to make on your own if you're a one-person household, or that's how much you're going to have to make in order to afford the available housing that's in the market right now. Affordable rent for the county's average wage is $759 a month. And also, because we had to rent a place, my wife and I, for about a year while our house was, we were rehabbing this house, we know that's very difficult to find rentals at that rate in this community. This is another graph that's really important, and I think what I want to highlight here for the most part is just the tail end of this graph here. You can see what's important here is the increase in these lines, the rate of increase here. This lower line here at 2.6, looking at historical economic data, when our economy has been strong, an average home should cost 2.6 times your household gross income. So what we're talking about here, if you have a $50,000 household income, 2.6 times that is $130,000. So in strong economic times, when you're making enough money to buy the housing that you should have for your household, your home would only cost $130,000. So, and I don't even need to say anything about that, how difficult that would be to find at this time. If you made median household income is $55,760, so that's for Charlevoix County. That means your home should cost $144,976. That's in good economic times. Right now, the national average is 3.8. That's this other horizontal line. So you can see nationally, this is an issue, not just locally. But you can see here, for the most part, we have East Jordan and the city of Charlevoix that are way above the national average. Boyne City is below the national average, mainly because the household income over time has increased at a slightly greater rate than the other communities. The housing prices are also increasing, but average household income is also increasing. So that ratio is staying somewhat a little bit more balanced than at the national level. But you can see here at 5.4 times, the city of Charlevoix's housing prices are getting way out of scale to what the local income is, median household income. Right now, the Zillow Home Value Index shows that Charlevoix County's median home value is $205,485. This is about 8.8% increase in the most recent data versus the year before. So, and that's as recent as 2020. Some of that data is from 2020, showing during COVID, it went up 8.8% in the county of Charlevoix. So here's another one, just looking again at a little bit more data on the similar graph. This is indexing off of 2012. So everything being equal in 2012, what's been the rate of change over all these different indicators? The number of housing units is the dashed line, that's staying about the same. Excuse me. The adult population, we look at that because that's the group that's going to be in the workforce. That stayed about the same, has increased just slightly. The overall population has declined slightly on average, but it's basically about the same. The one that's skyrocketing there is using home Zillow value. So that's different than the census home value. The home Zillow value includes actual pricing data, that what houses are actually being sold for. So you can see that's going up. Where the next highest is employment. We're actually seeing more jobs, 6.2% increase since 2012 in the number of jobs available, but the home value is going up at 43.3%. So it's significantly out of balance, the price of housing versus all other indicators. What I want to talk about also, just briefly, I want to touch on the separate topic of short-term rentals, because they really do impact the area. whenever we speak about this topic, my main goal is to let people know of the impact. I'm not advocating for more or less short-term rentals. I think that's a decision that has to be made by the local community. But I think going into it and making that decision as to whether or not to regulate those, I think it's really important to see, one, the rate of increase over the last year, which is maybe people aren't going to see right away in the general public if you're not involved in that economy, but also to understand changes happening at a very quick pace. Short-term rentals in Boyne City, and I know East Jordan and Boyne City because there's a company that provides free data on short-term rental because they do help people regulate those entities. So 187% growth in short-term rentals in Boyne City, 41% growth in East Jordan, and that's using December data. The data does shift by season. Some people may be wanting to stay in their own vacation homes in the wintertime, but they're willing to rent it out in the summertime. So in December of 2020, when we looked at the total number at the county level, when they provided us with that data, it ends up being 6.4% of the county housing stock. And I think what's really important here is to look at 1,129 short-term rentals exist in Charlevoix County right now. And when you think about going back to that housing data, the targeted market analysis, it's almost the same number, 1,192 housing units, both rental and home ownership units, could be absorbed into the market every year. So this is how many units are not in our market. And when we need to think about short-term rentals not as housing, because it really, when they become a commercial entity like that, you're renting them out by the night or by the weekend, it's not serving as a housing unit for the local community. Again, it's fine. It's great for economic development, especially in certain areas, in northern areas like where we are, where you have fewer hotel rooms and you want to build more larger economic base for our tourism industry. We have to just remember we need some balance because every single housing unit that goes into a short-term rental is now no longer a housing unit, and there's already a great need for it. One of the side impacts of this, obviously, is the demand. There's huge economic benefits to doing short-term rentals. You can get a lot of income from these. And so obviously there's going to be people wanting to invest in that. And there are consortiums and partnerships and people that are buying up a lot of the homes that are available on the market and renting them out as short-term rentals. Again, great for economic development as long as it's balanced, because it is, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the flip side of that when we don't have enough housing units. So, and this is what just jumping right into that, whose issue is this? Is housing impacting me? Maybe some of you are thinking, well, I've got my home. Maybe I have a mortgage. Maybe I don't. Maybe my mortgage is something that I can afford. It's really, everything's good. I've been able to retain my job through the COVID lockdowns, and so why would this really necessarily impact me? Well, there's a lot of reasons. It's a talent attraction issue. If you have local businesses that are trying to employ people in order to build jobs, in order to grow more customers for local businesses, in order to grow more clients for local services, support local grocery stores, if you don't have enough housing, you're not going to be able to attract employees from outside the area. And I know this is an issue. I've heard from local business owners who are trying to attract skilled labor who may not be here in the local workforce. They come from outside the workforce. It's luck of the draw. It's who you know. It's back channel communications that are where if you're able to find local housing for people, that's how you do it. But otherwise, it's really difficult to find housing. Employers are finding this because the costs are rising so high. I have had some employers that I've talked to, and they have a great deal of insight into their role in this. And one employer, in fact, told me that I feel like it's my responsibility to make sure that my employees have housing, whether that's existing employees that have lived here all their lives or employees that they're recruiting from outside the area. And he specifically mentioned I've got to give them a wage that's high enough to be able to afford the local housing. That gets more and more difficult as the housing prices go up. Needs to recruit people from outside the area, and if they can't find something affordable for the wages that they're offering, then they're not going to want to move here. Growing families, there needs to be movement in the market. I think that's really the general theme of how housing impacts people. If you don't have enough housing available, and we're at a record low number of new homes being built, record high prices for housing. If you don't have housing available for people to move to, they can't move to a house that's more appropriate. They may be okay in surviving in the house they are in right now, but if they're going to have going to be having kids, maybe it's a single person, they've gotten married, they're having kids, they need more space, and there's no home available for them, then they're really squeezed out of the market. Municipalities, they don't have as many engaged civic people that are involved in the local community, that are running for office, volunteering for local civic organizations. Schools, they may not have enough kids to be in the local, to keep things going in local schools for various programs. And seniors especially, I know as my parents age, it's becoming more and more difficult for them as they're getting priced out of a market in order to move to something where the bedroom is on the same level as the kitchen. They may not be able to do stairs anymore. They may need a smaller space. They may need to downsize, but it's too expensive and nothing's available for them to move that way. Again, all of this is making somebody look farther and farther away from the communities where they're already engaged. And renters who want to own, or renters that need to move to something slightly different. This is all impacting all these agencies. But again, it's a talent issue, and we're really trying to do everything we can to help both at the local and at the state level for people to understand housing opportunities have everything to do with economic development. You can't have economic development without having enough housing to support everybody. So how did this all happen? There's a lot of factors here. These are just the main factors, and I struggled to make sure I got everything on this page, but I wanted everybody to understand. There's a lot of things that we have to tackle, a lot of points that we have to address. Shortage of building trades. There's not a lot of people that are involved, and as many as were involved back before the recession. And I can understand that in 2007, 2008, if you were a builder, your trades, everything, your business dried up. If your father or your mother was in the building trades and you're now growing up and getting ready to enter the workforce, you may be discouraged from this because of the ups and downs in the housing market. So we're working in various ways, a little bit by little bit, to try to help people understand the benefits right now and of being in the building trades and the demand that's out there right now. Builders are scheduling into 2022 right now because of all the demand for home improvements. High cost of materials. I don't think I need to say too much about this. You probably all read about this. A 2x4 stud going from under $2 to over $6 since COVID came along, and the housing supply chain being disrupted by all of this has impacted 4x8 sheets of plywood going from what, $20, $25 over $50, probably $60 now maybe, and they're continuing to go up. Not quite as much as what happened in the heart of the supply chain issues, but they're still going. And then there's competition among high-end home construction. People at the high-end income levels aren't suffering quite as much as at the low income right now. And they're taking a lot of, instead of traveling, and they're taking their travel money and they're putting it into making their home space better, because that's where they're spending a lot of their time now. So that demand has gone up. Rising cost of land, there's less and less of it. It's getting more and more developed. So that's going up. The reduction in the federal and state housing assistance, that started a long time ago, and that's just getting more and more of a challenge. So there's a real need at the local level to really make sure that we pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, and we may have to make some more sacrifices and think a little bit more about how do we get creative with our own funding, what limited funding there may be. And we'll talk a little bit more about one of those strategies that we're working on right now with the county. Urban-oriented government programs, even the government programs that are out there are, for the most part, often very urban-oriented. And one of the things that Housing North is doing at the legislative, at the state level, in partnership with other housing agencies throughout the state, is really trying to help give guidance to Michigan State Housing Development Authority and MEDC, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and really thinking differently about a lot of their programs and trying to scale them and create requirements in such a way where rural projects are not eliminated from eligibility or from competition for the limited dollars that are out there. So, and I'm happy to talk more specifically about some of those opportunities that we see happening. The high cost of utilities is going up. I typed this slide up just before the Texas issue with the icing and the high cost of utilities down there, but high cost of utilities is true everywhere, and we're really having to look at different solutions for that. And utility expansion, water and sewer costs for materials and labor and everything for installation is going up also. And then I mentioned competition from short-term rentals is driving prices up. There's a lot of myths regarding affordable housing too. If you mention that, I know having grown up in the suburbs of Chicago, if somebody says affordable housing, you often think about some of the giant, which have now been torn down housing projects with hundreds, if not thousands of units being built in high rises that were dehumanizing for the most part. The myth that affordable housing brings crime, a lot of myths that are having to be debunked in order to get people, especially in any community, to think about housing. Subsidized housing is something that's important for our communities that we really need, rather than something that's a threat. And then there's, and as part of that is this public opposition to higher density housing. Higher density is really one of the things that we're talking about quite a bit when we talk about missing middle housing, creating housing that looks like any kind of housing that you would have in a single family residential neighborhood, but really focusing on some of the benefits of those housing types. And then the COVID related Zoom town is a word play off of boom town, from oil boom town, or any kind of boom town term you've heard back from the turn of the century and World War II. Zoom towns are, as you probably all heard, vacation areas like this where people can now work from home. They're wanting to live in an area where they'd rather be outside and recreating rather than in an urban area necessarily. So that demand has also had an impact on us. So what kind of strategies are we taking on to do this? Well, the main focus that we're trying to do is simply create housing choices. And we do have a focus more specifically than that on attainable workforce and affordable housing solutions. So this is focusing on mostly low income to the workforce, working class households, where these are people that some may or may not have jobs, some may be on assistance, but those people that are serving a lot of the employers in the area, also trying to find ways to lower housing barriers and create more housing solutions for our community in those particular areas. We do have, when we talk about homelessness, when we talk about very low income households, we talk about higher income households and some of the needs that are there for all those. There are other agencies working on those groups that we partner with. We stay abreast of the need in those areas, but we're, as far as the Charlevoix County Housing Ready program, and this is guidance from our housing solutions teams that are in each of the communities, we focus on the attainable workforce and affordable workforce housing. So these are the main areas that we're really trying to work on, and I've talked about those, breaking down the myths, trying to look at the lack of new housing, trying to make even new housing happen at an attainable rate, trying to lower barriers, including looking at overly restrictive regulations and long permit processes, and trying to reduce the time it takes to get approved for more housing types, and make it easier for people and less discouraging for people to try these new housing types that we may or may not have been aware of, or may or may not think that they fit within our neighborhoods. I think there's a lot of times where, again, we have myths about what these types of housing units look like, multifamily housing units look like. And I think what we're really importing upon people is that we need to rethink what our neighborhoods look like, rethink about housing as infrastructure, as something that we absolutely have to accommodate the needs of people in our communities and even in our own neighborhoods. And making sure that this housing happens near employment, because part of what goes along with any household expense is the transportation. Your housing plays a direct relationship to how much your transportation costs. I know that my wife did a calculation, and it's rather embarrassing how many thousands of dollars my wife and I have saved in the last year working from home versus the long distances of the commutes that we had to former jobs that we had. Mine, especially being the most, where I traveled half an hour to an hour for the last couple of jobs that I've had every single day each way. And So being able to live and work within the communities where you live really has a huge impact on your household, the amount of wealth that you're able to retain in your household. So also talking about supply of available builders, which I mentioned. So there's three main areas that we're going to talk about, and the first one being advocacy and education. We're also going to talk about how we coordinate local resources and create funding opportunities. But in this case, the advocacy and education work that we do really is there's quite a bit of it that we're out there doing, talking to civic organizations. And what I'm really asking people to think about, like I've mentioned here today, is for people to really rethink how they look at housing in their communities. A concrete example is single family residential neighborhoods. It's been a terrific boon for those who are able to afford housing. It's really helped retain wealth by allowing homes to have just cookie cutter homes built right next to each other, all very similar, all very much in the same income levels. And it's really excluded quite a few people from being involved in those neighborhoods. If you don't have opportunities in neighborhoods to have multifamily housing, then you really are excluding part of your community. And that has negative effects in the long term. And what we're talking about now is we're not talking about having a 15 to 20 unit house or apartment building constructed in a single family residential neighborhood. What we're really talking about is allowing people to take a single family home. Maybe it's imagine a large Victorian home. And I think we've seen a great example of that in Charlevoix County, the White House, which is actually green here in Boyne City, but it was a historic home, single family home at one point, as I understand it, and it's now a multifamily apartment unit. So it looks very much like the residences nearby, but it accommodates more families and more people. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. And even if it's just a single family home, maybe it's a larger home that they want to build a small apartment. Maybe it's a studio or a one bedroom. Either it's above a garage or in the back part of their home. Allow for that to happen and allow for more income to come into that household, which allows an elderly person to effectively downsize while creating some income opportunity for themselves. And more important, even as importantly, opening up a housing opportunity for somebody in the workforce to live within the community where they work. So that's just one example, but we're really trying to look at this as housing as infrastructure, housing as economic development. It's not just preserving single family homes in a particular neighborhood. So we're talking with planning commissions. I'm doing presentations at planning commissions. I've been in front of 8 of them already. I'd like to present some more. During COVID, a lot of them weren't meeting, but that's starting to ramp up here this spring, and we're able to be part of those. I'm drafting master plan language for various communities with their guidance as they tell me what they want to see happen in their communities. I can help put that into words and help them install that into their housing sections of their master plans. Specific zoning updates, I'm crafting draft zoning language that I've learned from other communities where specific zoning language has worked for those communities to tackle a specific goal that community has. So that's the role that I can play. Some communities are blessed with some excellent housing staff and planning and zoning staff, I'm sorry. I can be kind of that housing staff person to augment that. And in any community that doesn't have their own staff planners, I can provide at any level, anything related to housing. I'm there to help them craft language to really help them lower housing barriers in their communities. One of the other programs I'm going to talk about a little bit later is creating more year-round housing. One of the communities specifically that's challenged in Charlevoix County, all of our communities have a challenge of having a very high percentage of our housing be owned by people that don't necessarily live there year-round. And so which is great. And there's not always enough people to adequately support some of the local businesses in the wintertime. City of Charlevoix is the city that in Charlevoix County is challenged with this the most. And only 38% of their residences are lived in year round. Single family residences are lived in year round by people that are there all year round to support their local businesses. So there's a lot of impacts that this has, and I'll talk a little bit about a deed restriction program that's been started in the city of Charlevoix. Private donors have contributed funding, and deed restrictions are purchased, basically giving a cash incentive to homeowners in order to deed restrict their housing, in order to require that forever and in perpetuity in the future. Everybody that lives in that household must be living there at least 10 months out of the year. And that has a lot of value for the local community. So yeah, and that's a big deal. We did have one, a new deed restriction that just got donated, which also was an opportunity in the city of Charlevoix, where a person wanted to contribute to the local community, and they chose to allow for a deed restriction to be placed on their own house at no cost to the community, except and it was a donation to that program in order to help in the long term with the housing issues and challenges that the city has. We're in the midst of finalizing a fundraising program for that and to launch it countywide, and we'll keep people updated on that. So talk already about short-term rentals and letting people know about that in various communities. And then we're advocating for specific housing projects also. Good example, manufactured housing project came to the local community in Boyne City, and we were there to help provide housing facts, kind of busting the myths, but really trying to stick to helping everybody understand the facts about the various types of housing projects that are out there, and what it means so that decisions can be made based on those facts. So we're also working to coordinate local resources. And a lot of local builders have talked to us about some of the challenges that they have recruiting enough workers. Nobody can seem to get enough people. Talked to some of the local builders, and it sounds like some of their entry wages are above that $14.79, even for entry level carpenters, between $15 and $19 an hour if they pick things up quickly, and to be anybody with some skills is making over $20 an hour entry as their first job with some of the local builders. So that's very encouraging. We're also talking about accessory dwelling units, and in this way we're coordinating local zoning, and very soon we're going to be publishing a map that shows where you can build an accessory dwelling unit. This is a small dwelling unit you could place in your backyard and lease it out as a studio or one bedroom. It could be something, and this is what just about every accessory dwelling unit in Traverse City is, an apartment above a garage, basically a carriage house. If you're already building a garage, take some of that investment, create an apartment above it, and then you have rental income available for your house, and you're also providing an available workforce housing unit for somebody who may need it. Maybe also something that you may want to move into at some point if you wanted more income, and then maybe you travel a lot and you could rent out your main house to people. We're trying to coordinate those efforts, coordinate local zoning so that we can identify all the different places throughout the whole county where you can do it, and then try to streamline those processes and help people understand what it's like to make that investment, what could be their rate of return, and then offer our help in going through that process. Again, one by one, just creating more housing opportunities. Like I've said, just lowering barriers and even creating incentives for people to invest in housing. And part of those, knowing about those investments feeds into a database that we will have available. I have it available that I can help people locate primary and potential workforce housing sites, but also hopefully be able to publish it soon online where people would be able to see where those potential housing sites would be online. Working with local schools to expand building trades opportunities, that's a longer term process, but we're just bringing people together to talk about this, to see, have we explored every option? How can we partner with various trades programs and maybe some of the project structures that they build to become affordable housing units eventually. And I know Boyne City's already steering their new housing efforts from their school trades programs to create them in a slightly smaller, energy efficient, and more easily attainable price point. So really encouraged by that. Again, COVID has impacted that somewhat. Those have delayed projects as people have not been able to meet. So also expanding on the RRC program is a redevelopment ready communities program, and that's more generally about how can communities be more economic developmentally ready for redevelopment of their sites in town. That's a state program that's run through the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Terrific program, and we're partnering as much as we can with those agencies that are RRC engaged, as they say, and making sure that people are also housing ready at the same time, because understanding that link between economic development and housing. Creating local funding. Funding is this third strategy that we have, this third objective, is making sure that there's enough funding available. And this is a longer process that is a huge challenge for us, because they're just, you know, at the same time that COVID has impacted everybody's budget, especially local businesses, we also have a growing local need for more housing. So we're trying to figure out how best to handle that. And I've heard from a number of employers who, if together they could find other people that are interested in investing, could there be a local pool of investors that would help close that gap that we often have in creating housing that meets our local price point, which is typically a little bit lower than urban areas, but also still very high housing costs. So it becomes a little bit more difficult in a small scale housing project to make ends meet in this. So we're really, we're knowing that we need to find creative local tools for their local housing need. Opportunity zones is it's a federal program. There is an opportunity zone that surrounds East Jordan, and there's already some project in the works there that takes advantage of an opportunity zone, basically a tax break for people who invest in either housing or other investments in an opportunity zone. We're looking at LIHTC as a low-income housing tax credits. This is something that, although it's the most frequently used federal program for to create housing solutions, it's the one that's also the most challenging for rural areas. And this has a lot to do with what happens at the state level and the housing goals at the state. So this is one of those housing initiatives, policy initiatives that Housing North is taking on with the Michigan Advocacy Housing Coalition at the state level to try to change the housing goals at the state so that they're more rural friendly. Neighborhood enterprise zones is available in the city of Charlevoix. We've been talking a little bit with city staff about how to take advantage of this. So I think we're going to work on a draft proposal to help people understand how those, the advantage of that in a local community. Again, it's a tax incentive for making an investment in the neighborhood for residential in the local community. Land Bank Authority and tax increment financing. This is one that we've been working on for a while. Up until just a couple of months ago, it hadn't been used in the state to fund housing projects specifically. Tax increment financing is essentially where you take future tax revenue that goes above and beyond the current tax revenue. You can take a blighted or vacant parcel, and if the Land Bank Authority owns that parcel, or maybe it's granted to and donated to that Land Bank Authority, you can build a housing project on that property, take the incremental increase in taxes, and take that tax revenue and capture it back and pay back the costs of some of the costs of developing that property. So there's a cost to that. You have to forego tax revenue for X number of years while those costs are reimbursed. And those costs can be all over the board depending on how much costs were involved. It could be a 5-year tax capture. It could be a 30-year tax capture. Right now we're working on a demonstration project that would build 3 homes on Land Bank Authority property, capture taxes for approximately 5.5, 6 years in the future, and that money would come back to paying off the costs. The beauty of it is at the end of that 6 years, your tax revenue is a great deal higher than what it was when that property was essentially vacant, and that tax revenue is then captured 100% and then it's not captured, it goes then to all the taxing authorities in the typical ratios that are at the tax rate that's the same as everybody else. So it's a really unique but important local financing opportunity that isn't necessarily immediate funds out of pocket, but it is future tax revenue that would have to be foregone for a period of time for those housing units. So we're working on some of those opportunities right now. And a lot of it also is educating local entities in some of these various funding tools and letting everybody know what's available, what are the implications of that, what are the costs and benefits, and then going through that and helping both committees, commissions, and elected officials understand what those are so they can make those choices. So the next slide here just talks a little bit more about why we need that, why it's so important to have some of these funding tools, and it really, because it helps local governments, it helps employers. So we're looking to sources such as local governments, employers, and private donors to help with this. We're trying to finance pre-development. We do have, there's a housing fund with Charlevoix County that will, when we finalize the guidelines and the review committees, it will be available very soon for pre-development costs for housing developments within the county. So one of the resources that were available, that is available for us, homesforourfuture.org, it's one of our two websites. Housingnorth.org is our main organization website. Homes for Our Future has a lot of resources on it to help people be an advocate. You can sign up for a mailing list to see all of, to get emails for all of our webinars that we host. I mean, we've had quite a few of them. There's another one coming up on Wednesday. But we really help people understand kind of the umbrella of resources that are available for all sorts of housing, with links to other housing organizations. One of our very important tools, I think, especially for planning commissions, DDAs, city councils, township boards, is this housing ready checklist. And what's really helpful here is in just a few pages, it outlines in a handy checklist what you and your community and your planning commission, your agency can be doing to make sure that you're as housing ready as possible. Does your master plan spell out housing goals that are clearly actionable? Something where it sends a clear message to the planning commissions that it make zoning ordinance changes. What should we be doing to make housing more attainable and lower those barriers? So a lot of specifics that are really handy in that checklist. And then a communications toolbox, which is also terrific if you want to be part of the advocacy network. Some of the tools that help people communicate what's important about housing and why does it, and help relate it to people that may not understand the depth of the housing crisis that we have right now. So some of the specific projects, I've actually already gone into some of these here, but again, master plan guidance, housing friendly zoning ordinance amendments, and also talking directly with builders, not just listening to them, but also sharing some of what I've heard from people, and then being able to network those groups together. And then education of the general public. We've been able to get on some television news programs. We've been able to get on the radio. We've been able to get through to on various webinars and the internet through social media. I think that's been really important when we've appeared at various meetings. It sounds like it's getting out there because people have said that, hey, this topic sounds familiar. I think I heard you talk about this either on the news or somewhere else. So that's really an important part of what we do because you know, we all have a role to play in this. And I've already talked about the accessory dwelling unit toolbox. So more of these, talked about the Land Bank Authority project in Boyne City. We advocated for the manufactured home community that will provide over 140 homes in the next couple of years in the city of Boyne City, working with other manufactured home communities on some of their interest in expansions. And then some of the other housing related planning efforts that communities and including townships have been challenged with. City of Charlevoix, currently we're working with the city and the planning commission to introduce ideas as to how more missing middle zoning can happen. And this is that type of slightly higher density housing can happen in more neighborhoods in a way that's still compatible with single family residential. And there's probably some design guidelines that may happen in the zoning ordinance, but the general idea is to free up more housing opportunities for these communities. And then I talked a little bit about the deed restriction program for year-round housing. And this goes into some of those specifics. Again, at the county level, I'm sorry, single-family homeowner rehab program, just starting to partner with the county and their administration of a program. Albeit it's rather small because a lot of the state funding has went away about 4 or 5 years ago. And but there is a little bit money that continues to trickle back through as old home loans get paid off. The single family homeowner rehab program allows low-income homeowners below, I believe it's 80% area median income, making about 30 to 40,000 at the most. And it depends on family size, the eligibility, but single-family homeowners can apply for funds to do what they call emergency repairs, meaning if your well goes bad, you have no running water, you can apply to this program and get some of the limited funds available for to fix that well. A heating system. If your roof is failing, there's criteria that they have, very specific criteria, and that's a good thing to pass the word around. The funding comes and goes depending on how people pay off their old loans. So the availability, I always encourage people to call on this program through the Northwest Michigan Community Action Agency, and we'll be getting the word out. So like I said, we just started partnering with the county on this to help it getting the word out, and it's a good program. And then we've had some initial meetings with a number of different planning commissions, including the counties. So, this deed restriction program, I think I've highlighted that enough already. One of the things I want to focus on, though, also is that Housing North is an agency that we consider ourselves like a housing conservancy, where we are stewarding these deed restrictions. We're the ones that annually will provide compliance monitoring letters to those people that own those deed restrictions to make sure that people are complying with those year after year. And it's a long-term commitment, but it's really important that those public dollars and private donations get that those investments are protected over the long term. So that's one of the roles that we also play, and then getting involved with enforcement in partnership with the city of Charlevoix in that particular situation. So some of the legislative initiatives at the broader level. 2020, Housing North started a new coalition with other agencies. And if you had a chance to see the webinar from last week, if you haven't, we have the webinar is recorded. We just sent out the link on social media, and I'll be copying that too. If you haven't seen it already, please look at our housingnorth.org or our Housing North YouTube channel also, where that is probably already posted. And it's quite an extensive list of the things that Housing North through the Housing Michigan Coalition is doing. The main partners are at the top there. There's other agencies from other parts of the community, including some statewide agencies like the Home Builders Association of Michigan, Michigan Municipal League. It's been really encouraging to work with the Home Builders Association because they're really helping us understand, and some of us have been involved with home reconstruction, really trying to understand how is the building code permitting process, how can we lower barriers to that process also, which, you know, there's a lot of reasons for having regulations so that we have safe homes. Ultimately, times we hear about people doing their own homes without permits, and there's fires or some kind of devastating accident that occurs that could have been prevented with a permit. And there's a balance also between permitting and making sure something is safe, and then making sure that the regulations aren't so burdensome that it scares so many people away that they do the opposite. So with those are just some examples. I think another one I want to highlight here is what's called a pilot. That's a payment in lieu of taxes. And that is something, city of Petoskey not too long ago did something like this. It really is for the low-income housing tax credits, so these federal funding sources, it's critical, and it's actually required that the local community provide a pilot ordinance, a payment in lieu of taxes, where the community basically, by giving, they commit to having skin in the game, and they agree to foregoing some future tax revenue in exchange for that tax revenue going to offset some of the cost of building that housing. And that's always done in situations where that housing development has some sort of affordability requirement. it would never be done just for market rate housing. It's always done for something that has some sort of affordability aspect to that. So, and I talked a little bit about neighborhood enterprise zones, but generally this housing coalition is really focused on changing state law so that there are more opportunities, and Housing North is involved to make sure that we don't lose focus of the unique rural challenges that we have, make sure that those housing policies and housing legislation is appropriate for rural areas also. The QAP is a qualified allocation plan. When I talk about changing housing plans, that's what I mean. We don't just change plans just to talk about planning. We do this because that's where a lot of these criteria for local grants are based. And so when we reach out to you, if you've gotten one of our letters to say, please advocate for this, it's usually because it's going to impact us in the long term. And so stating in the qualified allocation plan that that some of these requirements are not appropriate for rural areas is really critical. And we're really starting to see some impact in how the state perceives rural areas. And some of those unfair requirements to rural areas are being changed slowly but surely. So that's really important. One of the other things too, the policy pillars here is tax incentives. Some of the legislation on this next page here that we've introduced is, along with Representative Cole was part of it prior. Then we're looking for a new sponsor. Let's see, the principal residential exemption, I'm sorry, the top one, yeah, is the one where we're looking for change in the tax law, which would allow for somebody who may own 5 rental units, some sort of long-term rental units. Right now, they don't get the homestead exemption on that because it's a business expense. To change that so that long-term rental properties have a principal residential exemption will lower the tax burden and encourage more long-term rentals. And that hits a key part of our market to have more long-term rentals available, especially faced with the competition from short-term. So some of these toolboxes that we're creating, mentioned most of these, deed restrictions, a community land trust. We have one in our community. Northern Homes Community Development Corporation, Jane McKenzie, has a community land trust. We see ourselves as partnering with them to find out, to feed them opportunities as much as possible and be as a partner as best as we can in creating more opportunities for community land trust. That's something where a house can be sold at a more affordable rate because it's only the house structure that's sold. The land is not something that the person has to purchase. So they do have home ownership. They can make improvements and enjoy a percentage of the gain in equity in those improvements, and then sell it if they ever want to move and still see a percentage of the equity gain in the increased value of that house. They rent the land from the community land trust for a minimal amount of money. They always have the community land trust available as a resource to help them with budgeting and advice on personal budgeting for related to their housing. So that's a unique opportunity, and just creating partnerships wherever we can, because we all need to work together to make this happen. So finally, looking at 2021, we're just trying to create more measurable goals for our housing solution efforts. And we've done a lot of learning in this first year, and I've been absolutely, I think I mentioned earlier, just absolutely thrilled with the response that I'm getting whenever I've reached out to anybody from any walk of life within Charlevoix County. They've been more than willing to spend a lot of time talking with me about their own housing issues, their own housing challenges, and some of their own ideas as to how to make solutions. So as we do that, we get people more involved because they realize how many people are engaged in this, and really build on that energy and those ideas. And then expanding on that advocacy, continuing to lower regulations, more partnerships with other housing stakeholders. One thing that we're really looking towards is more work in the townships and getting them more involved, as a lot of these, the economic expansion happens at the edges of some of these cities and into the townships. Townships are more and more impacted by this also, and getting them more involved and providing the needed resources to help them with informed housing decisions. prioritizing some of these potential housing sites so that we can provide even more incentives for people to develop them, and then obviously expanding fundraising efforts in our community. So those are that's in a nutshell. Oh wow, we're right at 1 o'clock. I finished, I think my watch just switched over. I didn't intend to not leave any time, but I'm happy to stay and sit and talk. Obviously I could talk for a lot longer than I expect I can talk about housing, but I'm happy to take questions, comments, thoughts at this point. First of all, any questions about what I've talked about here? I'm going to stop sharing so I can see more faces. And you're going to have to unmute yourself if you have a question. Yeah, and yeah, show your hand, and then I'll be better able to see you, and then I'll call on hands I see. Mary, you have a comment or question?
I just finished deed restricting my house.
Oh, thank you, Mary. Appreciate it.
Mark and Jonathan helped me with it. My house would be snagged up as a rental immediately. And my neighborhood, I live in an older neighborhood, and I really see it as a way to preserve the integrity of our neighborhoods. So you have lights on, lights on at least 10 months out of the year. And we have very few full-time residents left on Park Avenue. So, and I hope other people feel more comfortable with with that in mind, a way to keep your neighborhood healthy, a way to keep that balance so it isn't dark. So, like I said, I feel that it's a good way to preserve the integrity of our neighborhoods as time goes on. So anyway, I did just finish the process, and so it's done.
Terrific. Thank you, Mary. Great comments.
Yeah, thank you. All right,
Thank
you. It's very good.
Thank you. Nathan, I saw your hand up. Nathan Altman.
Yeah, hey, how are you? Great presentation. I appreciate all the information and updates. Question, do you have a little more information about those community land trusts and how they're set up? You might be able to forward along.
Yes, definitely. I'll send you some information. Yes, I will. I'm happy to send that out to, let's see, we have it on our website, but Nathan, if you would email me and let me know what your contact information is, that'd be terrific. I'm steve@housingnorth.org.
Perfect, I will. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Luther, I think I saw your hand up.
Yeah, Steve, good afternoon. Great presentation. Thank you. First, I'd just like to thank Mary. I heard she said she donated the deed restriction there, and so what a great gift to the community. My question for you was the neighborhood enterprise zones, and there was another one that you talked about. Is there something built into that to keep those incentivized housing units from becoming seasonal homes or short-term rentals, or is there a risk that the community invests in that and then they transfer over to something that's not used for housing?
Yeah, good question. For the period of time that the person's getting the tax incentive, it's a state requirement that they have, that it be a primary residence. So you have to prove every year that you have the principal residential exemption on that property during that time that you have the tax exemption, or tax break, I should say.
But then after that, it could be used for whatever.
Yes, and one of the questions I have at the state level, which hasn't been answered quite yet, is whether or not that can be, because the community has a lot of control over where those neighborhood enterprise zones happen, and some of the criteria as to who gets the neighborhood enterprise zone determination. So whether or not you can require a permanent deed restriction or not is part of those criteria. The state's looking into that right now and trying to give me some guidance on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
good presentation.
Thank you. I'm looking for other hands that are up. Anybody else? Yeah, Dean?
Yeah, a great presentation, Steve. It still sometimes feels overwhelming, the whole housing issue. And I'm wondering, could you speculate, like in the next year or so, what are the top, like 2 or 3 things that you think municipal government specifically should be thinking more about or working harder at?
Great question. I would say lowering the barriers. So I think, and Dean, for other people that don't know, Dean's on the city planning or city commission for Boyne City. I would say that all of our communities, City of Boyne City, East Jordan, and Charlevoix are all working very hard and have made already really great accomplishments in making zoning ordinance amendment changes to lowering those barriers and creating more housing opportunities. I would say that all of us have a little bit more work to do to create more like duplexes and triplexes and more opportunities. There are cities in the United States that have eliminated any zoning district that allows for only single family homes. And I think allowing duplexes everywhere would really, as long as the design looks similar to a single family home in many cases, is something, a huge thing you could do to allow for that. And again, Boyne City's already done that, allowing for duplexes in most parts of just about all the parts of the Boyne City. I think the other thing I would say is be ready and willing to look at some of this, the TIF opportunities that we have, the tax increment financing. That's a really tough one because obviously Boyne City and other communities right now are heading into your budget process. And there's already so many constraints on those budgets to think about foregoing future tax revenue. But again, it's tax increments. So it's that tax revenue above and beyond what you're getting right now to be able to forego that for a period of time. And even if it's never just for 2 or 3 homes, it's 2 or 3 homes. I mean, those 2 or 3 families that could be living in our communities and being invested in our communities. So it's what we hope to do is be able to do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 homes in each community and do a couple of them projects like that every year or two, and just keep rotating these projects around the county using this kind of TIF tool. So I think those are the top 2 things, if we could help people work through the pros and cons of that and just helping inform you of those kinds of decisions. Again, it's a budget decision you're gonna have to make at the local level. But I think those are the 2 things. And like you said, Dean, there's a lot more we could to do, but I think that's really it.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? I don't see hands up, but again, feel free to reach out to me. I'm gonna share my screen one more time. It's got my contact information on here. Please feel free to reach out. There's my email, there's my phone number. That's a cell phone. You can text me with questions. You can email me and request that I be at one of your organizations, or just one-on-one. You've got some housing ideas, you've got a thought, you want to participate in something. Maybe you've wanted to make an investment or in an accessory dwelling unit, or really anything housing related, call me or email me. I'd be happy to talk to you more about that. And again, thank you for your time. Just the fact that you're here today means a lot to everybody involved in this. And we really appreciate it. So thank you. Have a great day, everybody.